On the side of a hill, there are three little pigs. Well, they aren't pigs, are they? But human children with pink dresses and pigs' heads. And they aren't really acting as pigs either, but as naive farmers who cut the hay with a sickle and gather it up in their arms. The harvesters is a poetic image that doesn't ask to be picked apart. But if you think about it, the paradoxes are bewildering. The farm animals that are fed in order to be eaten are now the farmers organising production and carrying out the labour. But they also look like consumers because they're dressed in party outfits and wear white gloves like bourgeois snobs from earlier times. For all that, they're so luridly pink, and their fantasy of autonomy may not save them from the common destiny of livestock. I remember seeing meat in butchers' windows illuminated with pink lights to enhance the blood-rich character of fresh flesh. The children are dainty and pink, but the same colour that makes them festive also foreshadows their slaughter for pork. Polixeni was vegetarian. Well, she also ate fish, so pescatarian, but she wasn't fond of moralising her decisions. There's more of a playful impulse behind The Harvesters that's steeped in children's games, fairy tales and art history too, like the activity and composition recall Millet's picture of the Gleaners. And through this levity, but also deeper contact with the rural past, Polixeni wanted something marvellous, a poem, a sympathetic satire on the cultivation of nature. It's her ambiguous Georgics through the expanded field of children's fantasy. Children have this magical affinity with animals. Urban children meet up with animals through fiction, from cuddly toys to animations, always endowing them with language and, par excellence, the perplexing stories of Lewis Carroll. Children seem closer to animals through their fantasy, but the trade-off is that the animals are lettered. They have language, and especially communicate in child language. Polixeni takes this amusing animal appeal for children into symbolic mysteries where something less innocent, something grand and institutional seems to be at stake. With the ambassadors, for all their humour, I feel that the ownership of a whole country could be decided between the coded quacking of those garrulous birds with their formal academic gowns and case of draft contracts and treaties. That coastline that now stages the conference of the two negotiators from abroad might next be redefined by foreign armies with all the might that authorises their mission to argue for certain advantages to their central power, trade privileges, marriages, extortion, tributes and taxes. Often the landscapes of between worlds are grandiose and portentous, as if at the edge of a space or the end of an epoch, some natural gateway that conveys the marvel that children might entertain in entering the animal kingdom. The bear in a sailor suit, who is the reader, is simultaneously a child, a scholar, and a fierce predator. The one nature seems to induce something on the other, where the delicate uniformed schoolgirl who reads a text is also hungry, dangerous, ruthless, terrifying. The children don't only become beasts, but archetypes, a bit like those pretentious authorities in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, who are sometimes also animals. For the child, the adult is already somewhat institutional, laying out rules and determining your fortune. Those institutions of adult posturing represent an authority that the child from time to time considers pompous and would dearly love to challenge or co-opt, take on in a deconstructive spirit and satirise. Polixeni was always interested in boundary crossing, and these animal disguises, horsing around with proposals and wedlock, endow children with the power to make other worlds in their imagination. Such funny rituals that possibly predict something that may happen in their lives owe to be serenaded by this intoxicating violinist who induces such reverie and musical transport as to make you collapse on a bale of hay. Children can dream up alternative worlds, but also reflect sardonically on the one that they share with adults. The work has a comic dimension as children take on an image of the animal as charismatic human. The desert hero of The Sand Traveller, this pretend camel who runs out of water but gathers his strength for the crossing of a colonial wasteland, is both farce and tragedy, speaking the language of rollicking yarns and epic films. You don't know what to make of the pathos if you recognise the grief, which is hard to avoid, and allow it to undo the joke of anything so absurd. Like the caretaker. She seems to have lost everything in a bushfire, leaving her disoriented and gloomy. Her lady and lord might have perished too, but none of their assets or freedom will transfer to the caretaker. Polixeni had in mind the composition of Whistler's The Artist's Mother, and perhaps some of the content with the paradoxical twist that it's acted by the artist's daughter. Children are between worlds, between the world of infancy and adulthood. The animal masks let them straddle two borders that separate children from adults and human from animal. The photographs are both familiar and unfamiliar. We immediately recognise the subjects as children, but because the masks and acting are convincing, they uncannily present as if they were animals, or the learned boffins that the animals represent. Beneath the mask that asserts the presence of a horse or pig, the child is both present and deceptive, tangible yet transfigured. I guess they're absurdist, but Polixeni presents the children as animals because she sees parallels in their worlds. Animals, I mean real ones, enter our consciousness in mysterious ways, and because they're physiologically similar to us, we look at them in order to understand ourselves and our emotional realm. We anthropomorphise animals without even thinking about it. Unconsciously they equate with us, with all of our organs and instincts, only confoundingly, because we don't share language and we seldom share our privileges. For many thinkers in the past, it's what we don't share with animals that defines us as human. In a similar way, children are the other that defines adulthood. With children, we share much language, but also enjoy protected language unavailable to them, in the same way that we don't share power. In dressing up and wearing masks, the children, like actors, perform roles that are secret and not their business. In sumptuous landscapes on the border of sea and land, forest and plain, land and air, the children as animals define their own liminal world between fantasy and theatre, mythology, reality, archetype and free play, male and female, child and adult, and of course animal and human. The children are recognisable as animals as much as children, fantastically hybridised and enchanted. They've exchanged their kid identity for something Solomon sublime, borrowed on the terms of the mask and the grand topographical stage that they bestride. The breathtaking, majestic expanse of valley and mountain range in The Wanderer recalls the similarly titled painting by Caspar David Friedrich. The reindeer becomes a poet, whether she aspires to or not, by virtue of entering that exalted atmospheric theatre, apparently above the world of fraught daily cares where everyone lives. But she's paradoxically also an animal, that is, nature herself, nosing the airs at this lofty level where she communes directly with the unfathomable grandeur of the landscape. Between Worlds is such an apt title, between the sublime and the absurd, between the natural and the constructed, the monumental and the childish, between vaudeville and philosophy. These are poetic chasms that Polixeni lets you reach across in your imagination, and collectively the uncanny connections among such contrary conditions seem to symbolise the imagination itself.